Imagine being 14 years old. You love technology. You enjoy life. You laugh with friends. You dream about the future. And yet, somehow, you speak about eternity with a confidence that most adults never find. Now imagine something even stranger. Imagine that years after your death, something happens that leaves thousands of people speechless. A miracle. A miracle so extraordinary that people around the world begin asking a question. Did he somehow know? Stay with me until the very end of this story, because what happened after Carlo Acutis died continues to inspire millions of people today. And before this video is over, you may find yourself asking a question you never expected. What if one ordinary teenager truly understood something extraordinary about faith? Let's begin. If you had met Carlo Acutis on the street, you probably would not have thought he was different. He looked like a normal teenager. He wore sneakers. He enjoyed computers. He loved technology. He spent time with friends. Nothing about him suggested that one day people from all over the world would travel thousands of miles to learn about his life. That is part of what makes Carlo's story so compelling. He did not live centuries ago. He did not live in a castle. He did not grow up in a monastery. He lived in a world that looks remarkably similar to ours. The internet, computers, modern schools, modern families, modern distractions. And perhaps that is why so many people feel connected to him. Because Carlo's story feels close. It feels possible. It feels human. Yet there was something unusual about him. Something many people noticed. While others became consumed by popularity, success, or appearances, Carlo seemed focused on something deeper, faith. Not as a routine, not as an obligation, but as a relationship. People often described him as joyful, not because life was perfect, but because he had discovered a source of peace that many people spend their entire lives searching for. And perhaps that is why his story continues to resonate. Because deep down, everyone is searching for something: purpose, meaning, hope, peace, a reason to believe that life is more than schedules, responsibilities, and worries. Carlo seemed to have found that reason, even at a young age. Then something happened. Something nobody expected. Carlo became seriously ill. The future that seemed wide open suddenly became uncertain. Life changed quickly. Far too quickly. And this is where his story becomes extraordinary, because most people faced with such news would become angry, fearful, overwhelmed, and honestly, who could blame them? But Carlo responded differently. People close to him spoke about a remarkable peace, a confidence, a trust, not because he wanted to suffer, not because he enjoyed difficulty, but because he believed his life had meaning, even in the middle of pain. And perhaps that is where many of us begin to feel challenged, because it is easy to trust when everything is going well. It is much harder when life changes unexpectedly. But what happened after Carlo's death is the reason millions know his name today. Years passed. The world moved forward. People continued to share Carlo's story, his faith, his example, his devotion. And then reports began to emerge. A story, a healing, an event that many believers saw as extraordinary. A miracle associated with Carlo Acutis. Suddenly, people everywhere were paying attention. News spread. Questions followed. Could this really have happened? Was it possible? How should it be understood? And regardless of where people stood, one thing was undeniable. Carlo's story was far from over. In many ways, it was only beginning. This is where the story becomes fascinating, because many people began wondering something deeper, not simply whether a miracle occurred, but whether Carlo somehow understood that his mission would continue after his death. Throughout his life, he spoke often about heaven, about eternity, about purpose, about living for something greater than yourself. Listening to his words today can feel almost startling. Not because they predict specific events, but because they reveal extraordinary confidence, a confidence that continues to inspire millions. And perhaps that is why this story touches so many hearts. because Carlo reminds us that faith is not about age. It is not about status. It is not about being extraordinary. It is about trust. If stories like this inspire you, subscribe to Divine Stories. Every week we explore incredible saint stories, miracles, mysteries, and journeys of faith that continue to transform lives around the world. And trust me, the most powerful lesson of Carlo's story is still ahead. Let's be honest, most people are not wondering whether they will become saints. Most people are simply trying to get through life, trying to raise families, build careers, overcome struggles, find peace. And perhaps that is exactly why Carlo's story matters. Because he shows us that holiness is not reserved for extraordinary people. It begins in ordinary life, in ordinary choices, in ordinary moments. And maybe that is why his example feels so relevant. He lived in a world filled with distractions. Just like ours, he faced challenges, just like us. He experienced uncertainty, just like us. And yet he chose faith, again and again. Maybe the greatest miracle is not the healing associated with Carlo. Maybe the greatest miracle is the impact one young life continues to have on millions of people. Think about that. A teenager, a boy who loved computers, a young man whose life seemed ordinary, and yet years later, people across the world continue talking about him, learning from him, being inspired by him, finding hope through his story. That is extraordinary, because influence usually fades. Attention usually disappears. But genuine faith leaves a mark that survives generations, and Carlo's story proves exactly that. Lord, thank you for the example of Carlo Acutis. Thank you for reminding us that faith can flourish even in an ordinary life. Help us trust you more deeply. Help us seek meaning beyond temporary things. Help us find courage during difficult moments. And help us remember that our lives matter more than we realize. Give hope to those who feel discouraged. Give peace to those carrying burdens. Give strength to those facing uncertainty. And inspire us to live with the same joy and trust that Carlo showed throughout his life. Amen. Before you go, I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Carlo Acutis somehow understood that his mission would continue long after his death? Or do you believe his influence grew simply because of the way he lived? Leave your answer in the comments. I read every one of them, and your perspective may encourage someone else who is watching. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And remember, ordinary lives can leave extraordinary footprints.